Good afternoon, everybody. Today we're going to have a few speakers with us, starting with Jeremy Krause from Cornell Cooperative Extension.
We don't have any fancy mics or anything, but I'll try and speak so everybody can hear. Hi, I'm Jeremy. I work for Cornell Cooperative Extension in Chemung County. So I am tasked with taking information from Cornell University. Specifically, my focus is natural resources education. So I have a lot of creative freedom with that. There's a lot of topics in natural resources that I can share with the community. What I have to do is figure out what the community needs are, usually through some kind of surveying or just being out in the community like this and talking with people, and then taking information either from government organizations, from the university, from other extension offices, and sharing it with the community to help benefit the people in the community. So programs that our office runs, things like Master Gardeners, where we'll teach people best practice in gardening, and they can go out and do their own thing, or generally a lot of them become volunteers and then go out and teach what Cornell has taught them through that program. There's some other ones. Master Forest Owners is one of them, teaching landowners how to better care for the land that they own. I do a lot of natural resources work in invasive species management. I'm a fish guy by training. I have a master's degree in aquatic ecology, and I've done a lot of work as a contractor for the government doing fisheries restoration work. So that's really like my favorite thing, but I'll talk about just about anything from plants to deer management. That's basically my work in a nutshell, but we take information and deliver it to the community is kind of the mission overall, to help people grow and learn.
Okay, next up, let's hear from Mr. Gruber, Anthony Gruber, the owner and director of Devo Eco.
Hi everybody, as introduced, it's Andrew Gruber. I am the owner and director of Devo Eco. We are an industrial service company that works a lot with resource management of corporations, industry, and landfills. We focus a lot on recyclable and renewable waste within water treatment processes, new technology, designing and understanding process for development of industrial water treatment plants, as well as municipal water treatment plants, so plants like here in town that would be handling your sewer and septage water. Additionally, we handle renewable natural gas within landfills, and that is gas that can be used to send to homes for heating water, cooking, any of that sort of thing, as well as some of that natural gas, renewable natural gas, can be turned into energy generation through generators on-site or off-site. And we also deal with renewable natural gas that is used in vehicles and fleets. Some of our major companies, landfill companies that produce their own renewable natural gas, we assist them in bringing their fleets into the future with that type of usage, so that it keeps everything kind of in one place. I don't so much deal with the public directly, but I can answer quite a few questions that you might have that has to do with where your water goes whenever you use it, say from the building, or what happens when you throw your trash away. Thank you.
Next, we're going to have Connor Friedoff, a meteorologist from WENY-TV News.
Good afternoon, folks. My name is Connor. I work at WENY, a ABC-CBS station up in Horseheads. I am a broadcast meteorologist, so I have the fun task of blending the worlds of weather and communication. My day-to-day tasks include mainly just forecasting, taking meteorological data, raw inputs, putting it into a more digestible form, and then that's what we put on television, usually on either our evening news, 11 o'clocks. I get most of my weather work done during the weekends. I mean, they work Saturdays and Sundays, but on the weekdays I do more reporting work, so more of your regular old news reporter type deal. I actually have like my camera and equipment over in the corner over there. I'm actually covering this event as well today, so very fun in that aspect. In regards to, of course, climate change, I mean, I'm sure you all, or at least if you were in the area on Monday, we got a great example of how interesting the weather can get around here, with temperatures up in the 60s and then cratering down into the teens, a couple rumbles of thunder, and then woke up to some snow in the morning. So my job essentially is to kind of just sift through the noise and, you know, put the weather in a form that is easily, you know, readable for folks, because, you know, sometimes, you know, putting out that technical jargon can be a bit overwhelming. It definitely was for me whenever I first started. I got my education at Penn State and, you know, was able to keep it pretty close to the region. So I can really answer any questions on just communicating the weather, you know, the methods for doing it, how you can forecast yourselves. It's pretty much, a lot of the stuff that we use is publicly available. There's no paywalls or any kind of roadblocks. You know, it's great, you know, with the weather that anybody can forecast it, but, you know, we do, of course, you know, have some folks who are a little bit better than others in that, but, you know, please feel free to ask me anything about, you know, just what I do on a day-to-day basis, but also just how we can better understand what's happening in the world around us.
Last, let's introduce Professor Anthony Ingrafia, a Professor Emeritus from Cornell University.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for inviting us all here to talk with you today. I've been a professor of civil and environmental engineering at Cornell for 48 years. The last 15 years focusing on climate change and the impacts of various activities, some of which you've already heard about today, on climate change. So I'm going to spend a few minutes telling you some things that hopefully will instigate your questions from all of us. I'll start with 3 words: emission, commission, omission, all pertaining to the another word, methane. Methane, you've already heard mentioned natural gas. Methane is a major component of natural gas. It's a greenhouse gas. It's a very important greenhouse gas. And prior to 2011, not much emphasis was placed on the role of methane from natural gas on climate change. But in 2011, I was lucky enough to be a co-author of a paper, which is now seminal. It's got over 2,000 citations, in which we said that methane from natural gas was really important when it came to climate change. Really important. It had contributed to that point 1/3 of global warming. The other 2/3 mostly from carbon dioxide. Over the next 8 or 9 years, many reports and papers came out to confirm what our paper said. Notably, that methane is very important. We can't put off to the year 2100 any effort to decrease methane emissions. Methane emissions are the result of the non-burning of natural gas, the leaking of natural gas. For example, my colleague on the panel is correctly doing something really important, which is burning the natural gas that comes off of landfills. If you don't burn it, it gets into the atmosphere. In our paper, we said it then becomes 85 times more powerful than carbon dioxide on global warming. 85. And we said we can't wait for 100 years to do something about it because climate change is accelerating. During that 8 years, when all these other additional papers and studies were done, New York State decided to become a climate change leader. New York State, where we live. And as you know, in 2019, as you should know, the governor, the assembly, and the Senate signed off on a law, CLCPA, Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, which was at that time the most aggressive, most progressive plan by any state in the Union to transition off of fossil fuels onto renewables, decrease emissions soon. That law set up a set of milestones, 2030, 2040, 2050, at which time New York State would not be using fossil fuels for anything. That was 2019. It's now 2026. pretty close to 2030. And nothing's happened. Because Albany has stonewalled. I'm being political here for a minute. Scientist, engineer, being political, always dangerous. I'm not out to get voted into anything. So, as we sit here today, the then Lieutenant Governor, Kathy Hochul, 2019, strongly supported the CLCPA bill. She's now governor, and she's trying to undo the commission of that law by an omission. In the next 2 weeks, she has to submit a budget to the state. And during that budgeting process, she's trying to neuter that law. She's trying to take the findings from 2011 and throwing them out. New York State is no longer going to be a leader. New York State is not going to acknowledge the power of methane. We're not going to say anymore that methane is important not on a 100-year timeline, on a 20-year timeline. New York State is no longer going to count the emissions that are created by your demand. Every time you cook a hamburger, look for hot water, or heat your house, you're creating a demand for natural gas. And it's not coming from New York State. New York State doesn't produce natural gas. We just use it. But since we use it, we create the demand for it, and we should count those emissions as ours. The governor's saying no. Why not? Whose emissions are they? If they don't count for us, who do they count for? So yesterday we, 67 scientists and engineers, pretty darn reputable, sent a letter to the governor and the leaders of the state Senate and Assembly saying, get with it. Stop playing politics. This is all about science. It's the science of climate change. Don't give up the ship. Don't take New York State backwards. Don't relieve ourselves of leadership, climate leadership, and community protection. So, that's stimulation. Call the governor's office today. Call your assembly person. Call your Senate and say, don't let it happen. Don't rescind a law that made us a leader. Don't rescind a law that was protecting us from climate change. Thanks. Questions? More books? Isn't it true that there only takes one student in the class to stand up and all the questions in? Who's going to be the brave one?
All right, any questions, anyone? Would really appreciate them. Yes, go right ahead.
So with that, can I get each of your opinions on what do you think one important thing we can do as individuals to kind of help these issues?
So in terms of combating climate change, simple things. Planting trees is a great one. Really simple. It doesn't take very much time. There are a lot of tree initiatives in the state currently. Even though there are some grievances currently, there are some good things also happening. Massive tree initiatives out there, so hopefully there becomes some balance. But that's probably one of the easiest things. Picking up trash, planting a wildflower garden, going out and spending time in nature to appreciate it. That might influence your opinion on whether or not to plant a tree. Simple things.
I guess in my opinion, I think a way that it could become, we could combat that, or individuals could, is gaining education and knowledge on process, as well as understanding what you use and how you use it. We can look at many different initiatives where people have, plastic bags being banned in certain states where other states still use plastic bags, and it's understanding the potential of, well, if they don't have plastic bags, what are they going to use and how are they going to use it, and why aren't we making this something across the entire United States? Why does it have to be like a per state or a per corporation idea? Understanding wastewater and how it's recycled and what kind of energy consumption, every time you flush your toilet and the water goes down, you're now using energy to treat that amount of water, or anytime you wash your hands. And water is one of those resources that if we don't recycle it and clean it, then it's not going to be available for us in the future, or at least in the idea that we understand it. And by consumers or the public taking an understanding, and with social media nowadays, it's easy enough for somebody just to say something and not have any education or understanding behind it, and then everybody thinks it sounds good, so then they jump on this idea of we should have a push for that. And that can be extremely toxic to the idea of making a difference, because if people don't have the understanding of what's going on, then they can't really find a way to help take the next step.
Those are all very good points. I think too, talk to your people, talk to your coworkers, friends, family. Doing something like what I do, just carry like a usable water bottle. I have coworkers that are still going to a gas station or a place of getting an individual plastic water bottle every single day. It's just the little things too that you can do to help increase decrease your carbon footprint, whether it's be using something reusable or even coming to events like this. This is a great way to learn and understand what's going on in the world around you, or just learn from experts or like-minded individuals that want to do something good. Of course, contacting local representatives is good as well, but whether or not they listen, can't exactly confirm that all the time. So mainly just engage with people, and with social media is a great point as well. Do your best not to get overburdened by social media. I know many of us are guilty of scrolling when we've got some free time, but it can be discouraging. It can be overwhelming at times. So overall, just try to block out the noise as much as you can, but also stick to your goals of becoming sustainable, or just being more sustainable in a time like this.
Where does our natural gas come from then?
The natural gas that's consumed in New York State comes mostly from Pennsylvania and West Virginia,
Okay.
10 miles that way.
Yeah, I know where's that. As I just wondering. I'm about to move to West Virginia.
Do you want to give them your opinion on what they can do as
Coming back to that first question, look in your lives for where you can reduce your need for fossil fuels and increase your use of renewable energy. Example, the CLCPA, the law that the governor now wants to rescind, to omit, said that starting in 2025, all new construction in the state of New York, new buildings, can't use fossil fuels for heating. Well, if you're not going to use fossil fuels for heating, what would you use? You use heat pumps, which use electricity, which hopefully is then coming from solar and wind and nuclear renewables. How could you increase your use of renewables? If you're going to buy or lease a used or new car, consider an electric car, especially if you have the ability to recharge it at your own house. We're using electricity, hopefully coming from solar panels on your roof. There are many things that can be done in everyday life and your everyday expenses. So it comes down to reduce your reliability on fossil fuels, increase your demand for renewables.
Two questions about the methane. Who's lobbying the governor, and why did she change her mind?
Great questions. I think, this is personal opinion, this is not Cornell speaking, and this is an engineer, scientist speaking, not a politician. She's changing her mind because she wants to get reelected. She's running for reelection. And she thinks, I think erroneously, that saying affordability is the most important thing in New York State right now. And New York State homeowners can't afford to upgrade their homes. They can't afford to put insulation in. They can't afford to put new windows in. They can't afford to transition from a natural gas furnace to a heat pump. New Yorkers can't afford to buy or lease electric vehicles, new or old. She's running on the affordability thing. Who's lobbying her? The usual suspects. In 2010, when I was in Albany lobbying the then governor to not allow fracking, I was told by a good friend in the oil and gas industry, and I had a lot of them, Tony, we bring bags of money to Albany. The only thing you could bring is words. There is no limit in New York State on money from lobbyists. Did you know that? Any lobbyist pursuing any new law or change in an existing law in New York State can go to Albany with bags of money, walk into the office of an assembly person or a senator or the governor and throw it on the table. My answer.
How big of a problem is livestock production adding to the methane problem?
Significant. The three major sources of methane emissions, methane getting into the atmosphere unburned, are oil and gas operations worldwide, livestock worldwide, and wetlands. Methane emitted from wetlands and from oceans, from natural processes. And of those in the United States, the predominant one is oil and gas operations.
So both of you mentioned how we can't really make sure our representatives listen to us. And we also mentioned how us as individuals, what we can do. How do we make them listen besides preposterous amounts of money?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the last one.
How do you make them listen without money?
I wish I knew. As individuals, we vote. As individuals, we go to community meetings. As individuals, we write letters to the editor. As individuals, we contact our assembly person, senate person, and the governor directly with a phone call or an email or a personal letter. Individually, we have little power. Collectively, we'd like to think this is still a democracy where democracy says that the majority rules. And so if the governor is told in the upcoming election that her position didn't get her reelected, that's a strong message.
An organization is a powerful thing. I mean, one person going to an elected official's office and saying, hey, what gives, might be something, but it's not the same as 20 people, 50 people going to an elected official's office and saying, hey, what gives? A good example, I'm not sure how many were looking at some of the elections over in Illinois last night, but some of those primaries had excess of a dozen candidates or more. A winning candidate getting only around 29, 31% of the vote, coalescing around someone who is more apt to solving these problems as opposed to just going with the status quo. I mean, that's one step. I mean, granted, again, I'm a meteorologist. I'm not an expert on, election organization or anything like that. But as someone who works in an industry that is constantly scrutinized, sometimes I'm told, hey, you're being alarmist or you're saying it for views and whatnot. It's like, I'm just trying to tell you what the weather is. Like, I'm not trying to scare you or anything. If you're scared by the weather, hey, that's unfortunately not something I can solve. I'm just here to tell you what's going on. But in terms of elected officials, sometimes they listen to people more or less with clout or swing. But again, as the professor said, money often is the most powerful thing there. So rejecting that notion is very important here in the future.
Yeah, as we speak, there are, what's the day? Wednesday? Tomorrow there are busloads of people coming out of Tompkins County, mostly Ithaca, heading to Albany. And they're going to be protesting outside the Capitol building about this. So coming to events like this might give you the opportunity to learn about such events where you have collective action, not one individual, but hundreds of people showing up in Albany and saying, no.
So,
Taking kind of a different cue from Jess's question about what we can do, I'm wondering what you as scientists and engineers are seeing being done at the larger scale in terms of identifying new technologies, new processes that are helping to address and reduce the effects of climate change and or even just the reduction of fossil fuel usage. So what are you seeing happening in the scientific communities, at businesses and elsewhere that are kind of on the exciting front?
What are you getting out of Cornell, Jeremy?
So from a community education standpoint, a big topic in this county is solar development. There's a lot of opposition, but also there's a lot of people for it. Solar farming is probably one of those advancements that is going to take a little bit of time in this county specifically to catch on, but I think they might be heading in the right direction with that, as far as introducing renewable resources to the county. The key is us as extension professionals. I am not an electrical engineer or a solar professional by any means. I like fish mostly. And as far as I know, there's not very many solar fish out there. But taking information from from the university and delivering it to the community the best way I can is probably going to be our association's next steps. We did host a panel last year to talk about some of the grievances that have been happening in the community with some of the industrial solar that's been going in. And that was strictly to talk about the technology, talk about concerns and issues, and provide professional feedback. But that's where I think our organization is starting. As far as from an engineering standpoint and other, maybe you guys have other feedback.
So, from a standpoint of technology and ways to adjust for usage and climate change, my company, EcoEco, works with one of the largest landfill companies in the United States and, one of the top 10 in the entire world. And I can't really discuss intricate details of certain things that they do, but although they're a landfill corporation, they put a lot of initiative into sustainability and understanding. They do realize that, we as consumers are still, everyone in this room, I'm sure, has thrown something away today, if not something in the past hour, which, that's going to go and it's going to be filled in a section of land. Some of the things that we look at in my company and assist in technologically as well as understanding is what can we do to mitigate the impact of that process of filling the land with the waste, and if we have to, because that is the options that we have now, what can we get back from that? And there's an understanding, every landfill creates wastewater. So one of the largest, issues, as well as the methane, is the water from either raining or water or liquids that are in the garbage, and what to do with that whenever it comes out of the landfill. The bacterial breakdown inside of a landfill that creates the methane also creates certain nutrients that end up in this liquid that has to be treated. And a lot of landfills independently have their own treatment plants. It started in 1986. Landfills were regulated by the US EPA to have liners, and they had to collect their liquids and keep them stored and then treat them before discharging. Those liquids contain a lot of things that could be used, and as it was mentioned just a few minutes ago, the farming aspect. In some of the liquids that we now treat, there's tons of nutrients that we could use for farming. Historically, it was never allowed by regulation to develop or do anything with that. And as we're moving into the future and looking at other aspects, these constituents such as ammonia, phosphorus, that you find measured in pounds inside of the liquid, there are new technologies that we're trialing to actually extract these items or the poundage of these items and be able to reuse them, as well as producing the clean water that we would discharge to the creeks, that protects wildlife, drinking water, anything that's out there. Because you can't really store, the massive amount of water that gets into these facilities. It has to be handled, and recycling it is ultimately the goal, but also being able to recycle the things that are in that water that we could reuse. And, that would reduce the amount of efforts for mining or the amount of creation of chemicals and reduce our reliability on petrochemicals from, natural gas drilling and gas cracking, cracker plants, as well as move into a sustainable future off of something that we've considered to be a big problem. Everybody thinks of a landfill as this really horrible, nasty place that all the worst things go to, but it's really beautiful by design as technology moves forward of what we can do with that to the idea of recycling, resource breakdown, and development of a clean future.
New research going on at places like Cornell, for example, in battery research, making batteries cheaper, making batteries better so that they can work better with intermittent resources like wind and sun. Just as importantly, there's another renewable resource that has not been getting as much attention as it should, but it is now starting to get attention, even from the present administration, and that is geothermal energy. Some of you probably already have seen ground source heat pumps in your homes or your businesses. Well, that's shallow. That's harvesting the heat from a few dozen feet underground. But the really important resource for heat, which is energy, is thousands of feet underground. So Cornell right now has an active project to try to heat the entire 30,000 person, 1,100 building campus with geothermal energy harvested from 2 miles under the campus, 10,000 feet. That takes a lot of research and a lot of money to develop that resource. It's currently an experiment. We were doing well with money from the federal government for the research, but that got cut off. The current administration is interested in geothermal energy only from the point of view of producing electricity. But to produce electricity, you have to have steam. To get steam, you have to have water above boiling. To have water above boiling, the rock has to be hotter than boiling. And the rock under New York State is not quite that hot. It's hot enough to heat buildings. 2 miles under Cornell campus, we drilled a experimental well 2 summers ago. And 2 miles under the campus, the rock is at 200 degrees Fahrenheit. Can't generate steam, but you can generate a lot of really hot water to heat buildings. So things go according to plan. Sometime in the next 10 years, Cornell will heat its entire campus without burning any fossil fuels. And the resource is infinite. It doesn't ever go away. As long as the core of the earth is hot, the rock will stay hot. It'll last a couple hundred more million years after.
Did you want to let them know that that project's on display?
Yeah, there's a website you can go to, the Cornell website, Earth Source Heat Project.
What building's that in? There's a building on campus that actually shows the drilling. They have it all in the rock and geology that they went through.
I think it's Kimball. I'm not sure. But yeah, there's web resources, there's physical resources. You can come visit, literally, you have to plan in advance. You can come visit the experimental well that was drilled.
I can't really speak too much on research, but with colleagues, former classmates, seeing some of the work that they've been doing is always very interesting. There's never a deficit in passion for meteorology, thankfully. The weather is everywhere, and sometimes all it takes is one thing to get somebody interested. For me, that was my mom turning on the TV when I was 4 years old. She was checking in on the response and cleanup with Hurricane Katrina. Now, unfortunately, a lot of reasons why people get involved in the weather is usually a natural disaster. And think about it too. What's going to generate more clicks and more headlines? Is it a sunny day or a natural disaster? Hurricane landfall, an EF5 tornado. But even seeing like on social media, and of course, once you sift through, some of the landmines there, what you can find is an interesting new topic somebody is researching. A good friend of mine is gunning for his PhD at the University of Hawaii, and he does a lot of great research on tropical cyclone formation. He's looking at why certain storms are sustaining Category 5 strength for as long as they are. Just last year, Hurricane Melissa devastating Jamaica, a country normally that does not deal with nearly as much storms as, say, the Bahamas or Haiti. But, they had to deal with that storm, and now we are still in the process of understanding that storm, why it was so strong, why it sustained that strength even after landfall. And overall, you can find some really cool things that people are doing. One of my favorite things is called NATOcast, which, like it sounds, is simply a forecast for tornado formation. Sometimes it actually outperforms the Storm Prediction Center down in Norman. So you can really find a lot of interesting stuff, but you kind of have to go out of your way to look for it. It's kind of like an Easter egg hunt. It's not going to be in plain sight, but if you find something, it might really interest you. And there's a lot of great institutions we have in the States. I will go to bat for the Penn State Department of Meteorology any day. Cornell is a great meteorology program. Large campuses like University of Illinois, University of Michigan, but even smaller schools like SUNY Oswego and Millersville University also have great programs producing on-screen meteorologists like myself, and plenty of folks who find comfort in their work, either doing it in the lab or doing some code.
Yes, sir.
Our landfill is upstream from the river, where we get a lot of our drinking water. I've visited several times, done a lot of research. I believe it's well regulated. I believe it's safe, and the liners are containing it. My question is, when those liners reach the end of their lifespan and start deteriorating, what happens to all the landfills that we have in the United States?
So it's actually a great question. I've thought about that. I've thought about that a lot, especially being in the industry and knowing so much about landfills. The liners are made of a very durable, specialized HDPE plastic. Sadly, it's a process. Making that is something that comes from hydrocarbon and petroleum, exploration for natural gas. Those liners are the lifespan, if UV does not affect them in any way, is projected well over 100 years. Unfortunately, that's not, forever, but if we look around at, what we see even here in the room, nothing truly that we create will last forever. Landfills, though, do become less of a generator of emissions or discharge as they age. In the process of leaching, it actually pulls the nutrients and the different materials that would be in a landfill. So, whatever we throw away, if I throw away my iPad or the cup, water passing by will deteriorate metals and put heavy metals into the water. At a certain point, there's no more for the water to keep pulling. And once the bacterial process has ended and there is no more water in there to kind of accumulate or to leave life, because they're a living, breathing organism. They're constantly changing, adapting, especially with types of waste that go in. Because some landfills take industrial waste, some just take trash. They call it MSW, but it's what would come here from campus. As it gets older, those emissions, they are reduced, and so the landfill itself will stop generating methane as the bacterial decomposition process is ending its life cycle. there's a lot of research done that is public knowledge by some of the larger landfill companies that they have published on their own without needing extra regulation. And it's just to give the public an idea of what truly happens. And when landfills close, they go into what's called a legacy management. And federally, landfills have to bond so much money for the extent of what the landfill is, and they do a ton of research. So they have research scientists that study the landfill towards the end of its life to determine how long it's going to generate something that would potentially be hazardous to the environment. Most landfills, after about 30 years, don't really have a discharge leaving the landfill worse than what you'd find leaving a POTW that recycles water from a city. So it is a process that comes to an end. So the liner really wouldn't be necessary at the end of the landfill's life. It could just be another part of breaking down and, in all honesty, just be an inert, I guess, dirt-like substance that's left behind.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Another question for the engineer. Back, back in the, when they started making catalytic converters for cars to reduce emissions on cars, and then they started talking about emissions from factories, couldn't you just make like a big old kind of catalytic converter for factories?
They do, so in industrial, I can answer this one. They do have what they call scrubbers on a lot of industrial discharge stacks, or where now when we create facilities, originally when a stack was built, say for like a glass company, it was designed so that the pollutant would go above or discharge above the population and then disperse into the sky. That was, nearly 1900s, late 1800s. That was their great idea for protecting the public health and safety. Now we process industrial discharge or fugitive emissions from a treatment plant is processed through a scrubbing system. And usually there is a catalytic reaction of some sort that is done in that to either take the contaminant that they'd be discharging out of, say, whatever's coming out of the stack, or their emissions that are tested constantly. Industry has to test, as well as they can, with that reaction that they make, it's a renewable reaction. So they'll use something like an iron chelated material to take out hydrogen sulfide from their gas, and they can continuously keep using that, and they make a solid, because a lot of contaminants, whether it's water or gas, are measured in pounds per day, or the pounds of what is being discharged. And it's hard to think about that, like look at vapor leaving somewhere and go, oh, there's weight to that, but it does accumulate poundage. And we can take that and put it into something else that we can actually use as a recycled product, or they can put back into their process. So they do, a lot of industry is heavily regulated for what they discharge now, and become definitely a lot less of a contributor to greenhouse gas and toxic emissions.
Time for the exam, right?
Let's open notes.
Oftentimes I feel as though the reason why people have a lot of concern for climate change is because they feel as though they won't have to read the repercussions of the current behaviors that are going to elicit climate change to further its progression. What would you say are the current impacts that can be attributed to climate change as now or soon to be in the future?
What would assume to be the impacts of the climate change here in the future? That's a meteorologist question.
Absolutely. Well, as you've been seeing, with the introduction of more of these gases into the atmosphere, it does warm things up. Now, saying it just universally warms things, doesn't quite cover it. When you have more of these emissions sending particulates into the atmosphere, it creates something that we have called CCN, cloud condensation nuclei. And it is much easier for water droplets or cloud droplets, which are very small, much, much smaller than your typical raindrop. It makes it easier for water inside of a cloud to attach to this cloud condensation nuclei. And that accelerates storm development, accelerates cumulus cloud development. And that's why you can see something like severe weather in the middle of March. Normally up here, severe season, that's getting going in May. But having climate change continue to impact the region, you're seeing more areas that have been, in some ways erroneously, more resistant, or claim to be more resistant to climate, be impacted. I think a great example of that is Hurricane Helene, that retained a major hurricane strength long after it had made landfall in the southern United States. It devastated Appalachian communities that had been seen as more resistant to climate change. Just because you're in the mountains now, doesn't mean you can just, shake off a hurricane and just push it off. A lot of what we may have been taught as kids in terms of what areas are more susceptible to climate change, things are all different now. In 2021, Hurricane Ida made a lot of headlines because even after it made landfall in the Gulf Coast, it continued, not necessarily as a hurricane, but a very powerful mid-latitude cyclone that was bringing lots of rain, wind, severe thunderstorms to the area, and it's a bit of a personal one for me, nearly caused a dam 5 minutes away from my house to break. I mentioned earlier I'm from Johnstown. That was very close to the 4th Johnstown flood. So now in the back of my head, I have to think, hey, all these communities that I grew up in could just get washed away provided the right storm comes in. And I also thought, hey, maybe I'm not going to be impacted too much by hurricanes, even though we're inland. But as we saw in August of 2024, the remnants of Tropical Storm Debbie came up and devastated several small communities along small creeks, like the Cohocton River and the Tuscarora Creek. And that in itself can be attributed to it because we have these storms that normally, once they hit land, they should not have the energy, they should not have the longevity to make these impacts in land, but we're seeing that more and more often. And you'll see that as well in wildfire season. Maybe some of you have seen some of the wildfires going on in Nebraska. Now in the Plain States, we do see wildfires sometimes, but not to the extent of 700,000 acres burning at once. That's a lot. That's devastating for crop yields. And then you start to see a bit more of a loop. Wildfires impacting crop yields, increases prices at the grocery store, people can't eat. So it's almost like politics. You say, I don't do politics. Well, politics is going to do you. I never heard anybody say, well, I don't do the weather. Because everybody looks at the weather and says, well, it's sunny today, or, that guy on the TV said it was going to rain. Everybody does the weather. The weather's always going to do you. And just like we said, or just like I said earlier, with the wild week that we've had, high of 65, low of 18, you're going to be having more interesting swings. You're going to be having more natural disasters impacting areas that they normally don't. That's, of course, one of the impacts. I can't speak on the engineering side, but when it comes to that, you're going to have more interesting but extreme weather. And sometimes when it hits home, it's could be one of the worst days.
So there are impacts of climate change that are usually not attributed to climate change, but they're real and they're here. We might see a wayward tornado here every once in a while. We might see remnants of a hurricane here once in a while. But upstate New York is not going to become a desert. It's not going to become part of the Arctic. We might have some extreme weather, but not like what's happening in other parts of the world. Immigration. Why are millions of people immigrating from Central and South America to the United States? I've lived in Venezuela. I've lived in Peru. worked in Guatemala. I visited Costa Rica. I've watched what happened to the farms there. When you can't grow coffee, you can either grow poppies or get the hell out. Pardon my French. Those are climate refugees, and they're affecting our communities right here. I don't know what your politics are, I don't care, but when people walk thousands of miles in South America to upstate New York, you know they're doing it for a reason. They're being driven from their homes because of climate change. I worked in Guatemala 2 years, not continuously, trying to help natives, indigenous people, who used to work in coffee plantations, which are now dried up. They can't grow the coffee anymore. There's not enough rainfall in Guatemala. Help them build resilient, sustainable communities. It's really tough when they don't have a product to sell anymore. So that's an example that we don't talk about as a result of climate change. And it's not going to stop. It's going to get worse.
I grew up in Florida, and it's a lot hotter now in Florida than it was when I was growing up in the 70s down there, okay? But I don't believe that's due to climate change. I believe that's due to so many people moving down there, and you're putting down more asphalt, more concrete, builds up more heat, period. The more people move to Florida, the more asphalt and more concrete you put down, the more heat's going to build up. That's logical. That's natural sense. Because asphalt is a heat generator, right?
Yeah, you make a very good point. You know, we have a sort of a name for that. It's called the urban heat island effect, and it's not just present in Florida. It's present where there is, you know, a lot more, not just asphalt, but just more man-made objects. You know, certain buildings. You know, you'll see more buildings nowadays be built with more, say, like a white paint on the roof or some covering that's going to increase its surface albedo. And what albedo is, it's reflectivity.
Yeah.
So black is going to absorb all of that solar energy. It's going to be really hot. You have something that's white, it's going to repel a lot more than energy. It's not, maybe don't just stick your hand, you know, right on a sidewalk in the middle of summer, but it is going to be colder and you're less likely to get a scalding burn on a piece of asphalt in a big way that, you know, you can push back on that. Of course, planting trees is great. Vegetation or greenery, green spaces can help and has been proven to reduce the temperature in communities that, you know, have a lot of asphalt. And of course, there's road planning now that's being done in order to mitigate that, as opposed to having these very wide stroads with 3-4 lanes on either side. Getting a grass median in there makes a huge difference.
Maybe Everglades alone.
Do any of you think that there is a, politically speaking, one like overarching reason why these different things are being attributed or not attributed to climate change, or those things are being neglected as a whole?
Let's take a stab at that.
I am gonna abstain from any political stuff. My goal is to be neutral and deliver information as it sits, facts, and then people are able to make their own opinions around those things.
I guess I don't really take a political side on certain situations, but there are things, there are certain contaminants, as we've talked. I think we've talked about greenhouse gases, and then you know, my background is more water than it is, you know, gases and greenhouse gases, although I do work with the gas side quite closely. They sort of go hand in hand. There's certain Contaminants, I'll say from a political, I was just talking to somebody today from the DEC here, and we were talking about permitting and how facilities get their permit and what the permit process is in the Department of Justice, making sure that the permit's being monitored and fulfilled in regulation without exceedance in certain things. And it's interesting to watch as the climate's changing. There's certain contaminants that were on permits that we know about. One specifically I can talk about, it's the chlorides, salt, different types of chlorides, sodium chlorides. And when we have salt in an area, say like here in upstate New York or like Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where I'm from, you don't just have salt that they put on roads, but you also have salt that comes out of process, like pharmaceuticals. The pills that we take have certain salts in them, and that's something that your body expels. When those salts leave our body or the parking lot, they go into tributaries and into the river, the creeks and then rivers, and ultimately that's changing the salinity of water that we have as a local source, but ultimately whatever basin it's in, whether it's a Great Lake Basin or Chesapeake or Delaware or the Ohio River Basin all the way to the Gulf of Mexico. And changing the salinity in any type of environment not only changes what can habitate, what habitat is there, but it also changes different things like current, because different salinity of water and different amount of chlorides change how water movement can occur, even in like our oceans. There are countries out there that use reverse osmosis. The US actually uses reverse osmosis on a lot of seaside communities that didn't have access to fresh water, don't have access to drilling, and what they do with the reject water is what they call it, which is some incredibly high salinity. It just gets pumped back out to where it came from. And what they're doing is they're getting all of the water that they can use, increasing the salinity in an exact spot where it wasn't. And we are, I don't work on the seaside, but different communities and people that I talk to in panels, discussions, talk about how it really drastically changes. On the political aspect of that, because of how chlorides are used and sodium and different things, a lot of treatment plants on their permit don't have to, they don't have a limit. There's no limit to it. They can discharge as much as they want. And the governing bodies or regulators just have them monitored. It's considered a monitored constituent. And sometimes I wonder if that's political by fashion, because, being here in upstate New York, I know salt's a mineral that they mine here a lot. And if it was to be something that they'd reduce using or find other options for, say making roads more passable, as, they put down cinders or, different options, that would take away from that financial gain to certain political directions. So.
I don't mind trying to answer your question. I'm just a scientist, engineer, therefore I'm not expert in politics, so I can have an opinion. There is no single overarching reason for why disparate states appear to have different approaches towards climate change. There are different reasons, in my opinion. One reason is, what is the economic nature of that state? If you're talking about West Virginia or Texas, which historically have been fossil fuel energy states, it's pretty clear how they're going to vote. It's pretty clear who they're going to have for governor. It's pretty clear what their legislature is going to consist of. And you can predict what they're going to do in any particular political situation. Then you have a state like Pennsylvania, which is also an energy state. It used to be the #1 coal producing state, and now they're suffering the consequences of that. It used to be the #1 oil producing state. It was the place where oil was first discovered in the United States, and they're suffering the consequences for that. They used to be the biggest timber producing state until they wiped out the forests. Well, the forests have come back mostly. Now they're the #1 natural gas producing state, and they have a Democratic governor. Explain that. So, some states, obvious. North Dakota used to be a grain state. It was a farming state. Farmers tend to be conservative. And then they discovered a huge oil discovery. And North Dakota became an energy state. And now it doesn't produce very much grain anymore, but it produces a lot of emissions. How is it going to vote? Wyoming, same thing. Montana, same thing. States come and go. Montana is one of 2 states in the United States. I'm going to challenge you to name them both. I'm sorry, 3. Montana was the first state in the United States that modified its state constitution. Added an amendment to its state constitution that said the people of Montana have an intrinsic right to clean air, clean water, and a healthy environment. Montana. Why? Because it was raped because of copper mining, gold mining, and silver mining. Who are the other 2 states that have amendments to their constitutions that say you, as a citizen of that state, have an intrinsic constitutional right to clean air, clean water, and a healthy environment?
Not Michigan? Not Michigan?
Not Michigan. It's trying.
Yeah.
There's a movement. You're sitting in one. 4 years ago, the Constitution of the state of New York was modified. Clean air, clean water, healthy environment amendment passed unanimously. Pennsylvania. 3 states have that in their constitutions. Why?
The Pennsylvania native, I didn't even know that, so.
Yeah, Pennsylvania.
Yeah, we, as a PA native, it is, I'm not an expert on the behavior of native Pennsylvanians, trust me. I always like to joke it's 2 states, west and east. But in regards to your question, of course, anything that is perceived by a threat by a certain industry in the political world, that is going to be attacked relentlessly. Like a big example, of course, is oil. And, you know, climate change, it's not a new term. Many scientists were sounding the alarm. ExxonMobil had a big part in suppressing vital information, and we are now paying the price for that. So pretty much anything, of course, like mentioned with assault, you know, when there is any kind of perceived threat to that industry is going to mobilize, and a lot of times they mobilize very effectively by, you know, whether it be lobbying or creating advertisements on television. You want to watch a football game around here, if you're a Bills fan, chances are you're probably going to see some kind of serious ad with dark undertones and serious dramatic stock music. You know, that's for more than just elections. They're happening all year round for things like that. So really, even when us, the people, want to make an effort to roll back or try to, you know, get at least a little bit more of an advantage on climate change, there's always going to be folks trying to push back because it's not profitable to try to reverse climate change.
So, speaking of profitable and having these industries and corporations in power, do you think that getting rid of capitalism would be a solution to climate change and everything else?
Talk to me afterwards.
Okay. Well, our time is up for this panel, actually. Are you guys going to stay back for a little bit? Okay, well, a few of the individuals up here will be staying back for any questions. If you guys didn't come in at the beginning to sign in or swipe your card, just come meet me over here. Thank you. Have a great day.